From being rejected by the masses in its original release, to being reappraised and becoming a cult classic decades later, Halloween 3: Season of the Witch has had an interesting life cycle. That's the story I want to talk about: why Season of the Witch was a flop, and how it was viewed in the early age of the internet, and how it eventually found its audience. Is this film a forgotten masterpiece, or were critics and audiences right to turn it down back in '82? Let's do this. Alright internet, a big part of why the third Halloween movie was rejected was because it moved so far away from the first two films, in particular by stepping away from Michael Myers and the slasher genre those films helped create. And I love that idea. John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, who wrote the original films, are the ones who wanted Halloween to be an anthology series. I've seen some people say that it was always their plan, but I don't think that's true. Tommy Lee Wallace, who directed the third Halloween film and was an editor as well as production designer on the first film, said that they weren't thinking about sequels when working on the first. Honestly, I think that is the most believable, because while sequels and franchises weren't unheard of in the late 70s, it wasn't as expected or hoped for as it is now. So, when the chance to continue the series came up, that's when they had to figure it all out. The decision was made that Halloween 2 would wrap up the Michael Myers story, and the third film would shift Halloween into an anthology series. That, if you ask me, is where they made their mistake. The original Halloween does end ambiguously, with Michael vanishing into the night, but that is a great ending. It is dark and it is haunting, and while it doesn't answer everything, it does leave you with a sense of finality while still being open-ended. If they had made Season of the Witch as a second film and never gone back to Michael, I think they could have pulled off the anthology concept a lot better, but they really established Myers as the franchise mascot with the second film. And I really wish that they had pulled off the anthology idea, in part because I feel like this franchise is constantly trying to rebuild itself, but the need to include Michael means that they have to do so with their hands tied in a way. But I also just love the idea of a series that could have regularly released Halloween-themed horrors. Halloween 2 and 3 coming out one year after another proves that they could have pulled off regular releases in the same way VHS has been doing these last few years on Shudder. And hell, Friday the 13th was cranking them out fairly consistency at the same time. More proof. This era was littered with slasher films, and I think that Halloween as an anthology could have made the 80s a very different place. Now, I can't guarantee that it would have been a better place, but it definitely would have been spookier. You know, I love a classic scary horror, but, Halloween-themed horror stuff is spookier, you know? Now, all of that aside, Season of the Witch was not well received by critics. It currently has a 50% on Rotten Tomatoes, for those of you who care about that metric, and critics weren't just against it for the lack of Michael, but for the bleakness of the film and a messy plot. So, what is the film's story? The basic summary of the film, as you can find it easily online, is: kids all over America want silver shamrock masks for Halloween. Dr. Daniel Chalice seeks to uncover a plot by the silver shamrock owner, Connell Cochran. Now that is a fairly simple, if somewhat vague summary, and it sounds more like a mystery film than a slasher, because it is. Much of the film plays out like a modern for-the-time noir, focusing on trying to find the answers instead of the looming horror of the original film. Not to say that there isn't a sense of tension, because there is, it just feels very different. What's wild here is the reveal of what is going on with the Silver Shamrock Company. They're using microchips made from fragments of a stolen piece of Stonehenge. Hold on. Let me finish. Microchips made from fragments of a stolen piece of Stonehenge that they are implanting into their Halloween masks so that they can sacrifice the kids in a pagan-style ritual similar to what was done in Celtic times. And that is an insane plot for a movie. I will say, on paper, I like the idea of a blend of ancient magic and modern technology, an idea that the franchise returns to in the final film from the Thorn trilogy, The Curse of Michael Myers. And I would say that that film is worse than this one. And that one's got Michael Myers in it. I mean, he's in the title. It's his curse. But that weird mystic meets sci-fi twist in a non-slasher film that is an entry to what at the time was only viewed as a slasher series, still is honestly, mixed with that noirish tone, and you can see why it got the reputation it has. Not even from the poor reception it had at the time, which wasn't great on its own, but in the more recent times online. YouTube as a platform was part of what really gave Season of the Witch its reputation. The movie's story is the perfect target for that CinemaSin style of nitpick, plot hole film criticism. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of that kind of discussion because I think focusing on plot holes and inconsistencies is reductive and ignores other, sometimes more important elements like tone, performances, and honestly just general vibes. And a lot of those elements are what really shine in Halloween 3. The movie is more autumnal and feels more Halloween than anything else in the franchise. This is enriched by the score, which has been composed by returning John Carpenter. So this part's going to be a bit difficult to discuss because I can't really play the music in the video to prove my points because of copyright issues, but man, is the music good. Much like how the film moves away from the shape as its villain, the score steps away from the iconic theme. Instead, we get these lush, full synth tracks, and while none of the Season of the Witch score ends up being nearly as iconic as that main theme, I do think that this as a whole is much more easy to listen to. It works more as an electronic album than the original soundtrack does. I've been throwing it on for walks recently, and it really does just create a beautifully creepy mood that you want when going out this time of year. And I also gotta give full deserved credit to Alan Howarth, who I hope I am pronouncing his last name correctly. I just heard it out loud and I'm not sure. He did this and a lot of the 80s John Carpenter scores as like a duo. Their work together has led to some amazing soundtracks, and I also kind of love that I've seen him pop up in comment sections on YouTube to subtly brag about his extensive synth collection being a big part of what defined the sound of their work together. And I mean brag in the best way possible. He is kind of forgotten when the discussion of John Carpenter as a composer comes up, but they really did do a lot of work together in the 80s, which is like John Carpenter's most distinctive time. Alan, if somehow you are watching this, I love your soundtracks, even the ones that you've done without John. You do very good work. Something that soundtrack nails about the tone of the film is how bleak it is. And I mean it's like bleak. Not in the way that like Hereditary is, but I think for a slasher adjacent film of the time, it gets pretty dark. Not only does the film have a downer ending, but it is super okay with killing kids. Not only is the villain's plan to kill kids all over the country, all at once, but the most memorable moment of the film is not just the death of a child, but a gnarly one. The kid is choked out by a mask caving in around his head, and then bugs and snakes crawl out of his face. And the bugs are a perfect example of the different ways people look at Season of the Witch. Because on the one hand, it is a great scene, extremely uncomfortable, but if you try to break down the mechanics of it with logic, it kind of falls apart. The only way to really explain it is to say, because magic. Moments like this are why, despite all the hate the movie has had since its release, it has found an audience who appreciate the tone and craft behind it, even if the story is a bit of a mess. Personally, I fall somewhere in the middle, because while I'm not a nitpicker, I gotta admit, the problems with the story do kinda stand out. But the highs of the film are so much fun that the rest is really kinda easy to forgive. I do wish that there were a few more moments like that kid's kill, to tip the balance more in the direction of cool shit over messy stuff. I gotta say, as iconic as Michael Myers is, I do wonder what we could have gotten from the anthology version of this franchise had Season of the Witch done well. Critics aside, the film made a decent amount at the box office, but not Halloween 1 or even Halloween 2 money. If it had been more of a financial hit, we could have gotten more interesting creative runs at the holiday with the strong IP branding behind it, and it would have had learned lessons from Season of the Witch's shortcomings, and I'm curious about what could have come from that. But that's never happening. Michael Myers forever. Yeah, baby!
Yeah, baby, yeah!
Anyways, that's all for this one. Thank you so much for watching. I love talking about the Halloween films every year for the holiday. It's always a lot of fun for me coming up with what I want to talk about. I'm already trying to figure out what to do next year, maybe the Rob Zombie movies? Anyways, leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and until next time, have a good one.